Very good. Thanks, Chris, and welcome everyone. Can you hear me okay? All good? We have 1 hour in the middle of the afternoon when, depending on whether you've had lunch, we have a dip in energy. We're going to have none of that this afternoon. We're going to have some fun. If I've talked for an hour, which I could easily do, my wife tells me that all the time, I've failed. But I am going to talk about the topic of leading strategic transformation from my own experience, my own research. I'm going to try and make it interactive. I'm going to do a good pace. I have more. I could cover this for the rest of the day, but Chris, don't worry, I'm not going to. So I am going to go at a good pace. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Adelina, I think I've got the controls right. I can do all that. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and then we'll. There we go. That should work. Can you see that?
Yes. All good.
All good. Okay. So I aim to stimulate and challenge. I am going to follow the objectives of sort of, providing energy, confidence, and learning. I am going to try and convince you today, that's what a presentation and a discussion should do, that actually strategic transformation is a distinctive capability from other forms of leadership and other forms of management. I want to give you some stimulus, some ideas, some case studies, and also, as Chris said, get a bit personal, thinking about your own leadership style. So this is not just something for your clients, something about you, whatever role, shape and form you have. I'm probably going to use, given the number of people and time, I'm probably going to use comment boxes. I'll try my best to take any comments and questions as we go. We might use some breakouts. I'm going to busk it. I'm a former musician, so I'm going to busk it, if that makes sense. Just improvise as we go. I have a lot of research that hopefully I can back this up. I'm not going to read all that out. And also, I've done quite a lot of transformation work, leading transformations for clients, many of them digital, many in ecosystems, and I've also ran P&Ls myself. So I'm not just one of those dreadful consultants that sort of takes the watch from somebody else and gives it back to them. I actually have had real people to look after in a business, and I'm also an executive coach. That means I've got some successes. I've also got some failures too, scars as well as a few awards. Let's go straight into this. Director General of the BBC, the CEO of the BBC, somebody I know very well, appointed last year, Tim Davie, who looks very happy there, actually, I have to say. Marathon runner, former CEO of BBC Studios, the commercial store. Let me picture, I want to get your take on this. This is the sort of landscape he was facing as he took on his role. Government not particularly supportive, youth audiences moving away to the likes of YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, and so on, not just the youth. People feeling that in the country that it's too London-centric, unclear global strategy, lots of bureaucracy, a slow decision-making, not particularly innovative, journalists who are a bit loud and a bit political, particularly in the Brexit process. I am not going to talk about that today. I'm going to get emotional if I do. And so that's the landscape, right? That's the landscape he's facing, transforming the organisation, and a heavy expectation. This is a cultural institution in the UK, if not the world, and also a significant media and tech player in various ecosystems. So I've got 10 things I've listed there. Have a good read of the things. Imagine if you were in his shoes. What out of those 10s would you start on? And I think just to begin with, just to get some interaction, go into your comment boxes and write down what do you think you would do. And I'll give you a minute based on those things. Those are all the things that he could do, or maybe, I'm being cheeky, he has done in the first month or so. So have a read, and then I can see my comment boxes. Write down some comments in the chat. Oops. I'm struggling to see my chat. Adelina, I'm struggling to see my chat at the moment.
Yeah, can you try to double click on the window? Maybe it got
Sorry about this.
Next to your.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting if you look at some of the some of the answers. We've got assemble new leadership team. Yeah, absolutely. Miko says dismantle bureaucracy. Frederick, number 6. Appraisal systems. Yeah, getting into the appraisals. Stakeholder relationships from Scott. Number 2 from assemble new leadership team. Abdul, number 3, rebuild relationships. Absolutely. The end of linear TV. Who watches linear TV anymore? I do. Some people do. Number 3, yeah, relationships. Quite a range, right? Number 8, linear TV. 2, 4, and 9 from Lizotta from, so that's leadership team. Expectations of behavioral norms. This is a slow-moving organization in some parts. Arrogant, some would say. Great. I mean, great points. It was a bit of a cheeky question because in different shapes and forms, he's actually done all of them in the first month. You can assess whether, however you're close to whether he's done them well. But the point is, when you're doing transformational leadership, it's not quite as linear and simple as consultants would suggest, including myself in the past. He's actually had to shake up the leadership team, cut out paperwork, number of committees, started having a new conversation with government, actually set out some expectations of how they run the business and how they look after each other, and actually accelerating plans immediately to improve diversity by representation, particularly ethnic minorities, which has been an issue in the BBC, and obviously then towards inclusion and belonging. And that has actually fed into the appraisal system immediately, which is a radical change. He's actually trying to retain some people on screen who've been lured away from some of the commercial competitors. He's rechanged the organisation structure to focus on multi-platform commissioning rather than just linear TV. And ultimately, it all comes down to, if you haven't got great content and great programs, you ain't going to have much of a license to operate. So that's been a priority, as well as the last one being reining in some of the staff who have very loud opinions on social media, which is a highly controversial move and very difficult to do. So those are the 10. He's probably done more, but those are the 10. And it sort of shows that strategic leadership has to combine both visionary perspectives on, for example, the future of TV, as also the granular detail of behaviors, norms, incentives, and changes that get in the way of shaking up the organization to be more relevant to audiences and actually take on some of the big competitors. Let me start with a definition. This is a definition. I mean, who am I to say that I know this is a definition? But transformational leadership is a major shift in the positioning, the performance, and the capabilities of an organization. It's not incremental change. It's not improvements in operational performance. It's sort of moving from being chaotic to coherent, from being, if you like, analog to digital. It's a major change. And actually, it's something that, although it may involve a major initiative, and we often hear about major M&A, big cost restructuring, lots of new initiatives, it often combines a portfolio of those. But the key thing, in my view, is actually that transformation is something that continues after that individual and after an initiative. They learn a mastery of ongoing change in the way that Peter talked about before. So it doesn't just sort of start and then after 2 years stop and then they revert back. I'd be interested as we go through this to get your views on which organisations you think are the exemplars of transformation. I've got a few questions as I go through, so put that in the forefront of your mind as we go through this. In one of my papers in Strategy and Business, I with colleagues in my former organisation, Strategy, I've set out 4 building blocks, each of which I imagine you look at and think, oh, that's really obvious. But actually what we tried to do is come up with a contrary view of how you combine these building blocks in different contexts to transform an organization. What it doesn't say is you go through 1, 2, 3, and 4 and every transformation and you do it. In some cases, you have to tackle the legacy activities, particularly where there's legacy processes, systems, costs which are impeding progress. Sometimes there's a toxic culture. Think of some of the banks post the banking crisis, which if you didn't deal with that culture, you couldn't actually move on to innovate. In other cases, the organization may not have a clear vision to begin with. So these are building blocks that you combine according to the context, the leadership capability, and the ambition indeed of the organization. I haven't got time to go through each 4 of them. I'll share the link later to the article. It's a cracking read. I mean, it's a brilliant read. I mean, for the new year, you couldn't ask for anything else. That was my attempt at humor, by the way. But what it does is set out what we mean by each of these steps, some examples and some actions you can take. And let me briefly describe them. So creative defining vision is pretty obvious, but this is about setting out an ambitious future that in some ways makes the organization and the leadership team uncomfortable. I remember sitting in a boardroom of a large tech organization who I was working with, and they set out a defining vision and they gave it to me and they said, David, what do you think of it? And I said, it's a great description of the current business. It's not a defining vision for the future. They were all looking very smug as they were, but actually the hard work really needs to start with something that was more ambitious, more challenging. Then you need to design a system, a structure, an organization built on trust. Trust in the belief of human endeavor, that people with the right incentives, enablement, psychological safety, they can give their best. And that principle applies not only to employees, but to your relationship with customers and to others in your ecosystems. And the third thing from pivot from sprint to scale, everyone talks in transformation about new ideas, innovation factories, innovation mindsets, and so on, which is important. We argued that actually the hardest bit is working out when and how to select the right ideas, initiatives, and how best to scale them. The scaling bit is the really hard bit. How do you systematically take ideas, make money from them, and actually make them, if you like, a permanent part of the organization, or at least permanent until the next wave of change. And then on the last bit, on treat your legacy as an asset, again, traditional views on transformation would be that strip out the legacy, sell off non-core assets, strip out costs in order to fund the new. And that's sensible, particularly at the beginning when you need to show some quick wins. But actually, there's often latent value in legacy activities and legacy mindsets, potentially, that people get rid of too quickly. So there may be expertise you can draw upon. There may actually be people who can play a new role in the organization. So rather than being nostalgic, working out strategically which parts of the organization should stay as a strength, rather than just, if you like, starting with a greenfield site, which many transformation programs start with, and actually they have problems because it's unrealistic, and they actually have transition issues. And it's the transition issues which are often the most challenging for leaders, not necessarily the defining vision part. So those are 4 building blocks, just to sort of frame the discussion. I've talked about this one. I'm not going to go through each 4, but the first one around defining a vision. You actually have to call out why you need to change clearly at a level that people understand. Why do we need to change? Why does it matter? And very, very importantly, what are you asking me to do differently? That personal part. I'm sure we've all sat in on physical and virtual town hall meetings where leaders have got up and told the story of transformation, and they've high-fived each other, applauded the quality of presentation and so forth. And the people have walked out or left their screens with no idea on what they should do differently and why they should do it. That translation from big picture to small action is often missing. And that's the bit that I think is one of the most critical bits of defining a vision. I set out some actions you can take here. I've got plenty of examples that I could quote, and I may come back to you if we have time later. This is a quick example from The Guardian under a former CEO, a public document, which is fairly straightforward, right? What's it about? What's The Guardian newspaper about? Its values, its visions, and strategic aims. Nothing remarkable there, you might argue. It actually applied the strategy through the OKR approach, which I'm sure many of you all know. Very, very systematic translation of the strategy into objectives and key results, which again doesn't sound remarkable, but when you consider the journalists they have to deal with, the tech people and the engineers, that's a massive cultural change. And the reason I draw this one out is because actually the trick that David Pempsell and his team did, and they pulled off very, very well, was one, keeping it simple and cascading it through the organization and obviously involving people in creating it. They actually got a SWAT team right at the beginning of their work to go out into the organization and actually find problems and report them back. And these were not the most senior people, these were junior people, which was quite a remarkable sort of activity in a newspaper particularly. The second thing was they used their storytelling, if you like, capabilities that they have as journalists in order to illustrate the strategy throughout the organization. And it's remarkable that he told me that over 90% of the people, 90% of the people in the organization not only understood the strategy, but also understood their role in it. So this is not defining a vision and storytelling as one aspect of that. It's not just some big theatrical activity. It takes skill, to Scott's words, it takes mastery, and it actually takes proper involvement of the whole organization and cascading it through the organization too. This is where I'm going to ask your views in the comment box again. Transformation comes in lots of forms. I've captured 4 here. I mean, as a former consultant, I have to have a 4-box matrix somewhere in this presentation. Efficiency seekers, taking out costs. Many organizations have been doing that through COVID. Modernizers, upgrading the systems, the mindsets, the technologies for the modern day. Many consultants focus on those sorts of projects, but call them transformational. Organizations that try to redefine what they're doing. You may argue some of the energy companies are redefiners, right? As Chris's work from oil and gas to more sustainable energy. And then there's the industry explorers, I call them, the Amazons, the Alibabas of the world, who actually don't think in industries. They think about capabilities, and they think about just, if you like, applying their behavioral, cognitive, financial capital into new areas. I remember talking to a bank a year or so back, and their view of Amazon was, oh, an interesting organization that wouldn't be particularly interested in extending their reach in financial services, which was an interesting concept from a senior banker. I might argue that true transformation, I would welcome views on this, true transformation should be really the bottom of this page, the redefiners, the industry explorers. However, many transformational activities still focus a lot on cost, and they still focus on, if you like, catching up to the expectations of consumers, if not employees. But the reality is that the clients you'll be working with, they'll use this term, whether we like it or not. I'm not a massive fan of it, but it's the term that's used for enterprise-wide change. It's what they see themselves. So when, for example, I worked extensively with Royal Mail, they had a transformational program that we helped with, and that led to privatization. Much of it was in the efficiency and modernization, beginning to try and redefine. But for them, it was utterly transformational. So I would be interested now in the comment boxes just to get some interactions. Just pick one of the boxes. There's no trick here. I'm not going to be cheeky anymore. This is no tricks. Pick out one of the boxes and pick out a name of an organization that either you're working with or that you admire, that you think is a great exemplar of one of these forms of transformations, and pop it in the comment box. And I don't know if I can, Adelina. Can we unmute if people particularly want to comment on this?
Yes, of course. You can unmute yourself if you want to speak. Yeah, anyone can unmute themselves. Or we can ask them to unmute if.
Yeah. Scott, let's just change the dynamic here. Scott, you're normally a man of many examples and brilliant examples. Where would one of your clients, or potentially one of your companies you like, where would they fit in this?
Yeah, I mean, we've been working with a company named Harsco from the United States. They're a global company, but they're a New York Stock Exchange. And they transformed from a mining and resources company, so they were extracting materials from the ground, essentially, into a company focused on sustainability. And this has been about now a 5-year journey since the CEO first proposed it. And he had a tremendous resistance when he started. And now this year they were recognized as one of the most sustainable corporations in the United States. So they were a redefiner. The resistance was incredible, with people saying they didn't believe in climate change, with people claiming they would de-invest. But he stayed on track and he got people on board using a lot of the techniques that you've explained here. So it is possible. It's not necessarily easy.
It takes a long time, right? And a lot of patience, which we'll come back to.
Yeah, it's keeping that narrative going and keeping your investors and your board believing in you, because 5 years is a short period of time to change an organization, yet for investor and board patience, 5 years is an eternity.
Yeah, and especially when the tenure of many CEOs and other people leading transformation is less than that.
Exactly.
We need a far-sighted leader. Great, thanks, Scott. Any other people who want to sort of chip in, actually say something as opposed to just type? Doesn't have to be an organization you worked with, but or an organization perhaps you've read about, you've admired. We do face the risk of me going to ask people. No? A question I have, perhaps a different question, would be, it comes back to the nature of leadership, which is obviously the focus of this session, which is, do you genuinely think that, you know, efficiency-based transformation or modernization, catching up, is a form of transformation? I'd be interested in people's views.
David, Abdul here.
Yeah, thank you, Abdul.
Yeah, so a couple of opinions on this. So I think, first of all, I think it's a question of the institutional pressures that a company is feeling. As you said earlier, I think it's a question of who are the investors, what are they looking for, and what does the CEO actually want to transform to and be?
Yes, yes.
So that plays into it. And I think efficiency seekers and modernizers require a particular mindset of some historical knowledge of the organization. And so many of those will go through a sort of like a path-dependent model, pretty much.
Yes.
I think the redefiners and industry explorers are where they question the path dependency. I think, and that requires a very different mindset. And we've seen that to some extent now with the cloud movement in the IT industry, where a lot of the traditional models that we use to deliver technology to the CEO procurement models, those have had to radically be questioned and changed. But to the extent that the nature of whether we have IT in the organization at all is now being questioned. And so for me, that leadership, different kind of leadership needed. And it may even not, they don't necessarily have to even come from the same industry, that they may have to come from elsewhere. So to me, that's the sort of broad brush approach of how I would look at those four sections that you have there.
No, that's very, very helpful. That's very helpful. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people move, sort of talented, like moving from between the industry. In the industry, I spent a lot of time in media and entertainment and technology. There was a sort of penchant for brand leaders and retailers coming in, partly to understand the power of data and analytics, and obviously get into a more business to consumer type of relationship, which has previously been a business to business relationship. The challenge for them was actually, if you like, keeping their expertise and their mindset rather than going native too quickly, in where there's an entrenched mindset and culture, which often happens in transformations.
And we know boards are very good at ensuring mindsets don't change too quickly.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Thank you, Abdul. That's a great contribution. Any other views
David,
or ideas or names?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Going back to your generic question, if something efficiency seekers or modernizer can be called also transformation, isn't it that in order to answer that, it has to be a little bit more specific, because it always has to go back to the organization and the context of that organization, if something is transformational or not. Yes. What might be transformational for one company might be just a common business for another organization. So it always depends on the current status of the organization and the degree of change they would like to implement.
Yes, no, that's a great point, Peter. I completely agree. I guess on the efficiency, there's a number of companies, retailers, travel organizations that have had to take out, substantial costs and obviously tackle efficiency as part of that. I guess the challenge I would have, and I'm not sure I have an answer of saying it is or isn't, I'm partly provoking the discussion, is unless it changes capabilities or some form of positioning, the challenge on most efficiency initiatives is the business model stays the same, the positioning stays the same, and hence unless they continue to strip out, there'll be a limit, right? and hence they'll have competitive pressures, and then their competitive positions will be challenged over time, and hence it'll be a sort of start, you know, you'll start the initiative, you'll improve performance, but then what comes next, right? And that obviously depends on the context and their ability to learn, as Bill was saying earlier, learn new skills, new capabilities. Thank you for that. I'm going to move on. The reality is that, you know, most strategies don't lead to transformational change. I'm an optimist by nature, but I have to have a bit of a reality check as well. You know, this is some data that I pulled together from my previous organization. Most executives don't think they have a winning strategy. They don't actually think it's well understood, contrary to my example. They don't think they have capabilities, and actually missing out on opportunities, right? So there's, whether it's transformational strategy or not, and this is actually a broader landscape of just transformation, there's something going wrong from the idea to actually the execution, which is a long, you know, a well-rehearsed argument. But most transformations, you know, don't work. But I think the question, the provocation I'd have again is that, as we know, the crisis, the pandemic, which is not the only societal change and trend that we're facing at the moment, but it will accentuate some long-term trends we're seeing. I think whether it is about environmental change, technology uptake, particularly e-commerce, and some potentially emerging technologies, the societal issues we're facing, right, around inequality, wealth inequality, popularism, and so forth, as well as how we do work. The point is that the need to transform in many organizations has been there, particularly incumbents, for a long time. But I would argue for 1, 2, or 3, or 4 of these reasons, the need will be greater, either to make sure that they stay solvent, or potentially because they see the opportunities that some of the big platform-enabled ecosystems that have been pursuing, and think, why can't we do as well in the online world? Why can't we move from our industry to another to play in a new space? I think it will prompt, you know, the pandemic, however it pans out, will prompt some both tactical actions that we've already seen, accelerating initiatives, repairing parts of the organization. I mean, one of my clients has spent literally a CEO 3 or 4 months just on refinancing. He called himself the super CFO, and his challenge now is to regain his own personal narrative and corporate narrative on what the organization should be doing, rather than just spending time with bankers. So he's had a lot of work spent on repair of the finances. There will be repair of people, right? Mindsets. People are grieving, they're traumatized, they're sensitized, and any transformational leader who ignores that will not only lack a degree of humanity, will also not be able to engage them in a way when they want to fire on new cylinders to innovate and so forth. There'll be some redesign of structures, participations in ecosystems, or other commercial arrangements, as well as a degree of reinvention. And that's an overused term, but the question is, how can we rethink the way we do things? And I think the challenge is, how do you give people the headspace to not only deal with the tactical necessities of the land, you know, the economy, the difficult trading conditions, but also rethink, often in small ways, how you organize projects, how you make decisions in organizations, small chunks of activity that actually, when you build them up, can lead to and actually contribute to transformational change. And I include regulation, because any form of transformation that doesn't consider the prospect of, or the benefit of, deregulation or regulation is missing a trick. I remember this, I don't wish to sound smug on a Wednesday afternoon or arrogant, but I remember having conversations, and I would love to name them, but I couldn't, because they'd probably be listening in on this call, with 2 tech companies 10 years ago. As somebody, I spent a lot of time on antitrust earlier in my career. I worked with Formula One, MasterCard, and various other organizations. And I said, you haven't got an issue now, but actually you're going to have the antitrust authorities all over you. One, because of your dominant positions, secondly, your behavior, and thirdly, just they'll be looking at you, given how large you are and how you operate. And I also talked about how you think about your data, by the way, how you're managing your data. I was literally, with my colleagues, nearly thrown out of the room at the time. And actually it was like, you don't get us, you don't understand us. And probably at the time, they were making a call which was, actually, we can grow, we can transform our organization, and do well without worrying about regulation. But now what we've seen is that most tech companies, most of the large tech companies, are facing multi-jurisdictional legal cases and actions. So my point is, there are specific regulatory aspects of transformation that are often ignored by leaders as a sort of technical, nerdy aspect, but actually can be very prominent. And actually, for example, in the case of Royal Mail that I worked with for many years, deregulation was a critical enabler of the transformation and the privatization. And hence the CEO, Moya Green, Dame Moya Green at the time, made it her priority to build a relationship with the regulator that they hadn't had before. So that's just to sort of set out where we are at the moment. I've sort of set out some of the definition of transformation, some of the building blocks, and a few examples that I've sort of, that's been a sort of, if you like, a starter to some of the main course on sort of transformational leaders. Let me paint this picture. It's a little bit of a caricature, so forgive me, but many leaders, hero leaders, particularly, and I say this very carefully, and luckily I'm not in a room, I'll get something thrown at me, which is certain often men who consider themselves to be hero leaders. You know, the people who say it's all about effort and restructure of an organization and and sort of process, and actually sort of say that it's all about presenteeism and transformation is about working harder, trying harder. And you need a degree of that, of course, in any form of transformation. You often need to increase the speed of decision making, move people more quickly. But actually what it results in is people who get fatigued, and we're having lots of burnout issues at the moment in many executives, fatigue, disinterest, and actually people just ignoring it and going back to the day job, and actually often Machiavellian behavior. My view is that transformational leaders have to anchor what they do much more in the purpose of the organization and their own personal purpose. People want, I think we all want to see, if we're, depending on whether we're solopreneurs or working in organization, we want to know if we're going to give more of ourselves in terms of our skills, our energy. We want to have a greater sense of the purpose of the leader in front of us. What do they stand for? Ethics, values, morals, as well as what are they up for and how are they changing? How are they building, to Bill's point, a learning mindset? And again, structure is important. You often have to redesign organizations, simplify them, move the org chart. I'm not saying that's not important, but if you want lasting change, my belief, you have to have a greater anchor in the psychology of the organization, how the employees think, and obviously all the stakeholders around them. What are their hopes, fears, biases, motivations, and actually anchor that in what you do. Because as soon as you get that, you actually get this propulsion, this momentum building, because people feel they're part of it. They feel understood, they feel involved. It doesn't mean, by the way, that you don't have difficult conversation. It doesn't mean that everybody will make the future organization. Some people will have to go. But it does mean that you, especially for knowledge-based organizations, you anchor the transformation in what people think, believe, feel, and act. And as Scott alluded to earlier, if anybody says that transformation, I'll be interested in, here's some examples. If anybody says that transformation can take place in a quick time scale, I'd love to hear the example, because you need a huge degree of patience. So transformational leaders need to not only sprint from time to time, launching a new initiative, negotiating a new deal, restructuring a part of an organization, but they also have to be good at running marathons. I was just thinking that, I hadn't planned that. I guess that's maybe one of the reasons why Tim Davies, in his role as somebody who's done the Marathon des Sables, apparently, which is a marathon in the desert, which I will never be doing, hence why I will not be in his role. So those are the shifts: more purpose, if you like, more psychology, and more patience. And I think we shouldn't confuse this transformational leadership with, if you like, more conventional leadership or aspects of management. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm not saying they're valued, but they're, again, to Peter's point, it's a different context. And this is a caricature of conventional leadership, which you can read. Some of it can be right? Sometimes strategy does come first, an obsession with industries. I think the boat has sailed on shareholder value being the only consideration. But you see organizations being led by people who control too much, a lack of diversity of representation of and and cognitive psychology, too much process, effort and sprints, to actually what I describe here as aspects of transformational leadership. Culture and strategy coming together right at the beginning. I remember working with, spending some time with the Auto Trader team, and which is obviously, we used to be a magazine, highly successful online business, and a very successful transformation. And quite a challenging culture, and quite a strong culture, some would say mercenary. And I was intrigued by how you might have thought that it was a sort of clear strategy first, culture comes second, but actually they spent weeks and weeks on defining, shaping the norms, the beliefs, the traits, and then the day-to-day behaviors of what they wanted their organization to become as they moved on to become a more online marketplace. Obviously, they had a strategic idea behind it, but they didn't do the classic strategy review for a number of weeks, recommendations from in-house team or consultants, and then go into the org design, and then go into the process bits, and then do the culture, which I know we may be all rolling our eyes thinking that never happens, but I can tell you it's happened in my own organization I used to work for, and probably some of the ones I advised earlier in my career. But I think transformational leadership has a number of aspects here which I think are important. I've called out some of them already. I think there's the immersion of the C-suite. They have to be both in the business and on top of the business. What I mean by that is having a view outside, spending enough time outside, learning, as Bill said, negotiating, concluding business and so on, learning about new opportunities, customer needs that are not met, but actually when they need to be super immersed in the detail. You have to do both. And many CEOs and MDs I work with have a preference for one, and so, as we maybe all do, but often when either they get interested or fascinated with an area, they spend too much time on it. Fascination with particular ecosystems or digital innovations, and you think you're only licensed to operate as a leader is if you're making money or you have the board and stakeholders behind you. So let's just get back to some of the basics first before you spend weeks and months and lots of effort on all the cool stuff. There are 5 roles that I called out in this test, whether you've actually read one of my papers, which I'm sure was another great bedtime read. 5 paradoxical roles. And again, this is where I love some interaction and some views. Composed dynamo, an empowering obsessive, a grounded futurist, a curious architect, and a caring entrepreneur. We'll describe them briefly. The view, again, a bit like being in the business and on top of the business, you have to be fast, agile, make decisions, wake up, often a sleeping giant when you're doing transformation. I could think of many examples of leaders who've had to do that. But when it's necessary, you have to slow down, think, create time for yourself and reflect in order to make the best decisions. I see so many executives think that success is based on the number of hours they work in the day, the number of meetings they attend or calls they attend. Knowing when to speed up, slow down, Daniel Kahneman's work, is very important. Empowering obsessive, the most misused term, I think, in the corporate lexicon, I'd argue, empowerment. I had a former boss who's not on this call, who said, I empower you as a group of partners. And then about an hour later, he'd send us an email with 2 or 3 points on what we should actually do, which is an interesting definition of empowerment. But there is something about being obsessive with certain aspects of the business, customer needs, employee care, the financial performance, but knowing when to actually set a problem and set people free within bounds. It's interesting, Bill's examples of Hire and various other more autonomous working organizations, everyone says that it's all about empowerment. Just to be clear, there are very clear bounds of these organizations they work to, but knowing when to be obsessive and when to empower, again, is a critical, if you like, paradox to work through. A grounded futurist, hey, any leader at the moment who's not thinking about some of these systemic shifts that I've talked about and Chris referred to earlier is not doing their job right. At the same time, they need to be grounded into the day-to-day realities. And again, it's that sort of, Amy Webb talks about this in some of her great futurist work, the tactics of the day-to-day all the way through into the cone that she describes, into the sort of mega trends and systemic shifts. And having spent years looking at mega trends and pioneering that work in PwC, the hardest bit is not talking about those shifts. It's working back into what are the things we need to think about, ignore, do something about, and then plan for. It's that sort of working back that's the hard bit. And then the curious architect, you have to build something ultimately. You're building a new organization and a fabric. You have to actually put something down, not necessarily on paper, but you actually have to build something real and tangible that delivers value for all the constituents, but retain that degree of curiosity and that sort of sense of perhaps we could do it differently. Perhaps there is a better way, rather than, and it's interesting, the example from earlier, rather than thinking, oh, I've set the plan, I've done my scanning for the first 6 months of the transformation, I've got it set, now I just need to build. Wrong answer, especially in this context. And then the last one, very importantly, caring entrepreneur. I spent some time with an entrepreneur called James Timpson, who's a UK entrepreneur, who I recognise is a UK example. They run a series of businesses who have retail outlets, from doing your dry cleaning to photography and so forth. Well known for looking after its people very well, very generous in its benefits. They hire ex-offenders, prison offenders, which is quite rare for many organisations of that type and scale. So caring in one aspect, but just to be clear, he said, we can only do this if we make money, right? He's not a charity, he's not a social enterprise. And he's very, very exacting on the standards he expects, both in terms of how they turn up to work, right, as well as the performance they expect. So you can be caring, but you also can be, sharp elbows, if you like, of being entrepreneurial. Now, what I'd welcome, I recognise I've been talking for a while. I hope it's given some stimuli, and you may agree with it, you may disagree with it. That's fantastic. Why don't you pick maybe somebody, rather than one of your clients, somebody who's, if you like, a transformational leader, the big names. I'm not going to give you any examples, you know all the big names. Where would you map them against one or more of these roles? Or indeed, if you're feeling particularly creative and you've had your espresso halfway through the afternoon, another paradoxical role that you think I haven't covered. I'll give you a minute or two just to have a think about that. If you want to, once you've had a think and so on, if you want to put it in your the chat, then that'll be great. We're still having a chat. Adeline, can you help me again? Sorry about this.
Yes.
My chat is still not coming up that easily. What do I need to?
Maybe double click on the big window where you're sharing your screen.
Then it will click. Then it will change the.
No, on the Zoom window, because now you're on the presentation window. Is there a little box in the corner maybe where you have your Zoom video? Because I think right now you're in the presentation, not in the Zoom.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Sorry about that, guys.
Did you find it? Yeah.
No, it's okay. Not that I've not used Zoom before. There's something going strange here. But anyway, I have used Zoom before today. Before you think I'm completely.
No, but it happens when you share your screen. It becomes a bit more complicated than for us.
Here we go.
David, if it helps, just temporarily stop the share, find the chat box, and then.
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
That's interesting. Frederic says, paradox. So a paradox could be planned future versus emerging future. Yeah, that's a good one. And maybe undergrounded futurist. There's a consensus among some people saying that it's all about emergent strategy at the moment. I still think there's a role, and Chris has done some work on this. I still think there's a role for planning, careful planning under certain contexts. Again, it comes back to Peter's point. Emergent, agile type approaches into strategy and transformation work in certain contexts. They don't work in necessarily everyone. Scott talks about executional entrepreneur. That sounds serious. Built up an excellent team to execute a core business while simultaneously leading a separate team on exploration opportunities. Yeah, I like that. you see a lot of work. I remember having a good conversation with Caroline Frankenberger from St. Gallen, where she talked about, you know, the fact that it's the management of those two activities in transformation that often goes wrong, right? You tend to focus on the separate business as opposed to the linkages between the two. Activist learner. Yes, how could I miss that out, Bill? How dare I? How dare I? And is that a paradox? I'll be interested in your views on that. Is that a paradox? Do you want to come on off mute if you can?
Sure. I don't think it's a paradox. I think that historically, the stereotype of learning has been, you know, teacher broadcasting to students, right? One to many. But I think that increasingly we need to reverse it and go consider learning. We already know in groups like this, there's a lot of learning that takes place side to side. And we need to reinforce, I feel, back to front. So, you know, audience to speaker, and make learning not a passive phenomenon, not a receiving phenomenon, but one that's multidimensional, multidirectional, and experimental.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's great. Easier said than done, right? You have to sort of, especially if you've been, you know, doesn't matter about age, but if you've been successful in a particular role, actually going back, and I found this over the last 6 months, you know, moving from being a senior partner in a consultancy into learning new space, you feel a bit naked from time to time, thinking, oh, like I am now, making some, you know, small mistakes. And you think, after a while, as my mum says, does it really matter? Probably not. Somebody will probably have a bit of a gripe about me, but you have to take some risks and do some new things, right?
Yes, I think the activist learner, you know, I'm making this up, David. I mean, but you know, but I think the activist learner in my mind is somebody who uses critical thinking all the time, you know, is questioning, why am I hearing this? What does it mean for me? Distilling the lessons in the moment, so that there's not a lot of cost involved, and then trying them so as to reduce the risk.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that. That's a great point. So Tim talks about an optimizer creator. Yeah, that's a great, I guess that's a sort of a play on exploitation and exploration. That's a great way to frame it. Liz-Lotte talks about ambition for the board level, an ambitious guide and a smart supervisor. That's interesting. Liz-Lotte, I don't know if you want to come on and talk about that. I'm curious about how much, in a world where there seems to be this shift towards more autonomous working, how much supervision you actually need to do.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm primarily working on boards and with boards. So my perspective is a lot around the boards. If you think that you don't need supervision, you could just look at Facebook and other technology companies. I think we will need a lot of supervision, because I think the actual regulation will not be there fast enough. So the boards need to take your integrity and actually supervise on those areas. And that's actually what a lot of boards are already doing. But you need to combine it with the ambitious guide, because you can supervise your company to death.
Yes.
You really need to be ambitious to take enough risk to move into new futures. And I think it's, somebody else said it before, I think it's hugely challenging when I work on 3 listed companies. I think it's hugely challenging to actually communicate around your steps. And if I look at the thing you started with, the 4, whether you're actually transforming, whether you are a redesigner or industry, I think for established companies, you need to be in all 4 quadrants. And I think that's the challenge. You can't just be in one, because you will not have money to do anything if you're just on the 2 lower levels. Maybe if you're on Amazon or something, you can, or Tesla, and you can keep getting more funds in. But for the rest of us, you need to get some of the funds from your ongoing operations and efficiencies. So I think to actually only be in the lower ones, they will entail that you do some of the efficiency. I think the problem is if you get stuck in the 2 first ones and never move down to actually redefine.
That's
and
great.
I think the redefine is going much quicker now.
I agree. That's fantastic. That's a fantastic contribution. Given you're working with boards, to Scott's point earlier, in transformations where timescales are often shorter, so the timescales of the board members of both of their personal interests and their roles are shorter than the transformational efforts. How have you seen that managed well?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I don't think that actually their interest is shorter. I think it depends on what kind of board you're on.
Right.
So I'm primarily working in the Nordic settings with the kind of 2 levels, but with non-execs that works closely with management.
Yeah.
In many of my boards, whether the people are only sitting there for 3 years, their ambition is long term. So their ambition is not short term.
Right.
When they get caught up in short term things, it's very much because there are things that you couldn't foresee that we discussed before. That maybe you didn't have enough supervision on. So things come up very quickly. So you need to move your focus to handle the short-term things, but still your ambition is really long-term. I think the other thing that is really, really going to be tricky for the next years coming, which goes to your point, is that regulation think that you are, if you can get people to report on everything, the investors know what to look for and do. And I'm kind of thinking, I don't know if you looked at all of the sustainability reporting, but you're really literally forced to talk about the entire strategy and share that. But in fact, the strategy is a combination of the long term and the short term now.
Yes.
And there's no chance that we can let everybody know that, because that would kill the company. So it's a really hard dilemma now with more and more things. And this year in Europe, we're supposed to be reporting the entire area around remuneration programs for all of our executives. As if, which I have a big challenge with, I want leaders that isn't driven primarily by the financials. I want leaders that's driven by the passion. But the more the regulators forces us to go into details on that, we're driving our leaders the wrong way, I think.
Yeah. I think you need a healthy combination of both, don't you? That sort of profit and purpose. Fantastic contribution. I appreciate that, Lisotta. That's fantastic. Learn a huge amount from that. Before I move on, any other views on either the combinations, the paradoxes I called out, or even a name? Go on, give me a name of a leader that you think is in this category, just to make it real. Go on, give me a name.
Hi, Tim Sharp here. Hi, I was the one who put in the optimizer creator
great.
paradox, because I think given much of the conversation so far on this breakout, but also in the whole session, I think absolutely businesses need to optimize their existing operations today in order to generate revenue, provide the foundations that are solid enough to withstand creating something that may or may not work. And I think that is your example of Amazon, so maybe Jeff Bezos is an example of optimizer creator, in that he has optimized a model to generate enough revenue, allowing Amazon to make failures that do not actually impact the business as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think that's essential for any business to transform, because transformation won't be quick or easy, as you've mentioned, but it's also not going to be linear. And I think that the greatest transformations are those struggles that businesses go through, and it's in the learning from those struggles that you come out much stronger. If it was smooth, it would be too easy. You would just think, oh, we're going to coast now, and complacency sets in. So it's actually allowing that culture of struggle and that lesson that can be learned, or those lessons that can be learned over and over again, without being penalized for making those mistakes.
Yes. That's very clear. That's a great point. That's a great point. One of the things that struck me, I remember having a conversation with Stephen Carter, Lord Stephen Carter, who runs Informa, the publisher, and various other parts. I used to be at Alcatel-Lucent. And for somebody who's been in the spotlight in his career, he used to be a regulator and advertising exec, also cable executive, I think. He actually said the thing when you're leading transformational change is it's a very public role. It's very brutal. Brutal both in terms of the energy it demands, often the sacrifices that you have to make sort of personally, but it's a very public role, and you have to work out your bounds, that how much you give of yourself, where you give of yourself, and create some routines. Otherwise, frankly, you burn out. You won't enjoy it. But that's the thing about transformational roles, which I think are distinctive from, say, other leadership or management roles. But Frederick, just to shift on a bit, Frederick makes a great point around a paradox being one of thinking versus sensing versus feeling versus imagination. I love that because as somebody who spent a lot of time in the last few years increasing my coaching skills, which I believe many consultants should do likewise. Too many consultants, especially me in my earlier career and others, do too much telling. So greater listening, greater sort of use of neuro-linguistic programming, getting a sense of how people are thinking, what they're actually saying, what they're not saying. These are often considered soft skills, and everybody would nod and say they do them. But if you spend time with your clients and say, how much time are they spending in meetings, in calls, on their own, sort of actually getting a sense of what people are doing, feeling, and so forth. I think that is quite a transformational change in terms of personal behaviors. If you said, for example, at the end of a meeting, and said to people, not only what did we actually cover, what did we achieve, but what did we say? How did we feel? What should we do differently? If it was an HR-led, I'm being a bit provocative here, if it's an HR-led discussion, I think it would be a norm. But actually, I've seen some leaders who have very strong commercial drive and entrepreneurial skills and so on, actually who are beginning to take a greater, if you like, spend more time on their sensory skills and actually firing up their imagination and talking about how they feel, which for some people who've grown up in a world where you can't do that, and it would be frowned upon and psychologically unsafe to do so, that's a radical change. And that goes to what I believe is one of the biggest anchors of transformation, which is behavioral change. One thing we talked about, and I just want to sort of touch on, I've captured here 6 roles, and there's probably 60, right? But 6 roles that transformational leaders can play at different points in the calendar, in different points of the week. And as one of my clients said to me literally yesterday, different points in the day, right? You can move from dealing with a crisis to role modeling behaviors, to facilitating a discussion, to being a disruptive challenger on a particular topic, to being the change agent, to actually somebody who keeps the strategic narrative clear. And so whilst many books are published on particular aspects of transformational leadership, and we go on courses on particular aspects, rebellious talent or grit or safety or, et cetera, the reality of transformational leadership is you have to use all of them wisely at different stages of the day, often night, and actually know the role you're playing and often signal it in the discussion you're having with people to say, my role today is actually to listen, to not interrupt, using Nancy Klein's great work. Or today, actually, I'm going to be provoking people to call out the problems, as David Pemsel did in The Guardian earlier in his career. He actually said to people, I want to hear the problems. I think the transformational leaders can actually be much clearer about the roles they play, and they want the roles other people to play in order to get their best views, skills, energy at different stages of the transformation. I've talked about behavioral change. Given time, I'm not going to talk about these. These are aspects based on the research that I've done myself, research I've read and experienced, or things that transformational leaders can and do at different stages of the transformation. I've touched on many of them. I've talked about boundaries. I will focus on one aspect, which is the reacting to crises with care. I remember speaking with the CEO of EasyJet, whose name escapes me, who's now the CEO of ITV, Carolyn McCall, when EasyJet had a number of crises, when the announcement of Brexit happened, for example, and the devaluation of the currency, etc. Operational crises, financial crises. And she said something which was quite wise, which was, everybody will look to you as a transformational leader, she's talked about the bright future and where we're going and rally the troops and so on. But actually the words you choose, the actions you take when things are difficult, are not only important in those specific moments, but are remembered for months and years to come. And that takes that wisdom that I talked about, that composure. Yes, you need the dynamism, but you need the composure to react with crisis with care. Because the reality is, in any transformation, as a number of you said already, it's an up and down process, right? Not a linear plan. It will not all go swimmingly, but actually you have to react carefully. But when you do have success stories, not just celebrate them, but create a format from them. What worked, and be laser. I'm in a number of advertising groups I've worked with, brilliantly laser-like on terms of creating formats around how they, for example, or not, integrated agencies into the network, and actually said, that's worked, that format of that process worked, let's scale that across the organization. Again, that laser-like obsession with detail when you do actually have a success.
Thank you, David. I think we have 5 minutes until the next
and there,
session.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
That's a good nudge and a shove.
Thank you.
I've talked about transformation as a concept, what it involves, and some of the leadership and how it's distinctive. I just want to finish with sort of thinking about transformation in whatever role you play. Anyone know who this gentleman is? I'm sure you do. Peter Drucker. This is actually, I mean this sincerely and seriously. I do believe this crisis can be a catalyst for our own, whether it's just taking care of ourselves, whether it's doing things just a bit better, or potentially transforming the way we do our work, echoing some of Bill's words on learning. And I would ask you and encourage you to think about what small changes you could make. I've captured 8 here, and I'd ask you perhaps in the last 30 seconds or 1 minute, just to, and then this is a private moment, just to, you can ignore this, but think about what change that you could make, small change that you could make, that you potentially could have a transformational impact on your own leadership style, your own impact with clients, or your own business. I've listed some here. I mean, you're becoming the outsider again, thinking afresh of what you do. Start learning, as Bill talked about, proper observation, listening, sensing more, reaching out to different people. We talked about that earlier, genuinely different people you might feel a bit uncomfortable with, managing energy more than time, Tony Schwartz's work, which I think is becoming more important given the challenges of the pandemic. And I think there is something about being really ambitious. You know, the moonshot, why not go for something and then work back? So just take 30 seconds. I'm not going to ask you to share it. I mean, if you want to, that'd be wonderful. But just in your own moment, what one thing do you think you could do to transform your own impact? And I'm doing something rare on a Zoom call, which is actually allowing a moment of silence. That may be transformational in some of our meetings. My transformational moment, which I think could be actually being patient. I'm not, I hope, a rude person, but I'm quite impatient. I want to get stuff done. And I found the constraints of lockdown and schooling and various things quite challenging at times, and still, especially now. Knowing how to be more patient and actually working out what's possible actually gives you more headspace to think of the bigger ideas rather than getting all worked up into the day-to-day mechanics of how things work, if that makes sense.
David, we are out of time. We have groups in transition. So now is a good time to wrap it up.
I just wanted to convey my passion for the subject of transformation. I hope I've conveyed some ideas, a few frameworks, some practical suggestions, and some provocation on how you advise your clients about transformation, but it starts with you. If you're not transforming yourself, I don't believe you have the license to operate to transform your clients. And that's it.
David, thank you very much for a broad and, personally very exciting topic.